Alrighty, hi everyone. Second time around. Thank you for bearing with us. I understand we ran through some technical difficulties, but I'm glad you stayed with us. And your patience will be rewarded. We have an interesting session for you now. I am very pleased to introduce to you our session at the European Sustainable Energy Week, labeled EU Industrial Policy and the Clean Energy Transition State of Play. My name is Nicola Romanowski. When I'm not moderating, work as Senior Energy Manager in Cefic, so do all sorts of things energy policy related. And that is quite interesting at the moment because energy policy is a very dynamic space, especially here in Brussels. We just had the publication of the Affordable Energy Action Plan early in the year. We're looking ahead to the publication of the Clean Industrial Deal State Aid Framework and a number of other initiatives, targeted guidances, and strategic advice coming up throughout the rest of the year and early next year. Now, in a way, all of these initiatives try to follow up on the promise of the European Green Deal, which, if we recall, was always pitched as, yes, a climate package, but always with the add-on of competitiveness in addition to that. We saw that most recently affirmed again in the Clean Industrial Deal, which, yes, focuses on industrial competitiveness, but also always on the climate dimension at the same time. These things travel in parallel. Now, if we take stock of where we are in our progress on our climate targets, in our progress on industrial competitiveness, I think it's fair to say that we can be cautiously optimistic in some of the progress we've made on the emission saving side. The situation is much different when we look to industrial competitiveness, where I think it is fair to say now we face a risk of deindustrialization in Europe, which of course then also undermines our longer term ability to reduce emissions through homegrown technologies and through our own, the decarbonization of our own manufacturing industry. So what we want to do today over the next 80 minutes or so is connect the two. We want to connect the policy level discussion we're having in Brussels with some of the industrial realities that companies like Yara or Dow are facing throughout Europe. See whether or not we can identify some common issues, perhaps even common solutions, or if not, then at the very least have a very interesting discussion. So without further ado, I am very pleased to welcome our distinguished speakers for today. That is, first of all, Tom House. Tom is advisor for the Green Transition and Market Regulation at DG ENER. In the past, he has also worked as head of division at the IEA, the International Energy Agency, and worked on many different pieces of EU renewable energy legislation. Good to have you with us, Tom. Secondly, we're joined today by Tiffany Stefani. Tiffany works as Vice President for Government Relations and External Communications at Yara. Yara, of course, fertilizer company, the market leader in plant nutrition in Europe. And she has over 20 years of experience in Brussels policy making. Thirdly, I'm very happy to welcome Paul Münich. Paul is project lead for the transformation of the chemicals industry and the electrification of industry more broadly. He works for Agora Industrie and Agora Energiewende. And he has a research background. Prior to joining Agora, he worked as a research assistant at the RWTH Aachen, also on industrial transformations. And then lastly, I'm very pleased to welcome Hélène Levray, working as Government Affairs Leader EU on Energy and Climate at Dow. Dow, of course, one of the largest international chemicals producers, and Hélène also looks back at 20 years of experience in the kind of Brussels energy landscape. So I'm very pleased to welcome all of you. Now, what we want to do is we want to hear from our speakers, a quick initial intervention on how they see kind of EU industrial and energy policy landscape at the moment, before then launching into a more detailed discussion. At the end of that, you, our dear audience, will have the opportunity to also pose questions. And I understand somewhere around here, there's a QR code Slido link floating where you can pose your questions. And if they're good, we can then ask them to the panelists. So that's a little homework for you. But before we get there, without further ado, I'd like to get started. And Tom, maybe start with you to provide us with a bit of an idea of where we are right now, 2025, in industrial and energy policy in the EU. The Clean Industrial Deal has been published. A lot of additional initiatives are still coming up. And again, over us hangs this kind of specter of industrial or deindustrialization, ongoing high energy prices, and of course, a difficult geopolitical position. So overall, I assume it's busy times for you. Could you maybe explain to us where we stand right now, what's coming to us? Over to you.
Thanks, Nikolai, and thanks for the chance to be here this afternoon. Well, as you said, the Commission published its Clean Industrial Deal policy in February, and this tries to tell the story of where we are with European energy policy and how we carry on with our pathway towards decarbonization, but we do this with ever more emphasis on the need to ensure our competitiveness, whether that's our industry, which we need to keep, we stay an industrial powerhouse in the world, or whether it's new industries. With all of these things, a key element is the affordability of energy. Since the crisis and the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we've had complete disruption of our usual story, where we thought we could eventually become more sustainable, but we had quite affordable, quite secure energy. Now we realize that that's a thing of the past, and that we don't have affordable fossil fuels. We don't have secure, affordable fossil fuels the way we used to. And for us, in a sense, the three goals of energy policy have come together. To be sustainable, to be secure, to be affordable, we cannot have a fossil fuel future. We can only have a decarbonized future. And the route to that has to be made as cost effective as possible, so that it can be as affordable as possible, so that we keep our industries and grow new industries and jobs. That's why when we launched the Clean Industrial Deal, we immediately came forward with what we called the Affordable Energy Action Plan. And this, in essence, shows what we're trying to do across the board in every sector of the economy. We're looking at how to make the European single market work better, how to make the energy sector, the electricity system work better, more efficiently. Because there are ways we can improve the way our economy, our sectors, our electricity or other energy systems are functioning, and actually save money and lower system costs, so that we keep energy affordable and make it more easy for industries of all sorts to electrify, to switch away from fossil fuels towards electrification. And with this whole initiative of improving the way the efficiency of the system focuses on all the barriers that stakeholders and industry and others tell us are out there that need tackling, whether that's problems with financing the grid and the grid constraints that we face, or how grid tariffs are set. It's a problem of permitting, whether that's permitting for new grids or permitting for access for new industries to establish themselves, or permitting for new energy sources, new renewable energy wind farms or solar farms, for instance. All of these have quite heavy, long, uncertain, and therefore costly permitting procedures. So this has been the focus of a lot of European legislation, and we're working with member states to speed up the whole process, not to stop the process and to just ignore other social concerns or environmental concerns. These have to be addressed. But instead of taking 12 years to get approval for a transmission line, or 3 years or 4 years for a wind farm, we can try to make it shorter. We can try and make the process more efficient and faster and come to decisions sooner. And all of that makes the system work better. It lowers costs, it lowers uncertainty, and that's better for everyone. So whether it's looking into the grids, their financing and their permitting for industry or for energy supplies, looking at financing overall. We know that a lot of the energy system we have is very old. It needs replacing or upgrading simply because it's old, and partly to be able to absorb more renewable energy. So the question of financing is important. Here we've got various pots of European money that are being used to support innovative investments or projects. But there's also a national state aid framework where member states can also be financing innovation and decarbonisation. So looking at the financing side, permitting side, the regulatory side, the regulatory framework that we have of the energy sector was designed years ago, and regulators and system operators themselves have to adapt. For instance, it's clear from all the examples and all the analysis that if we had flexibility in the way our electricity markets worked, if we had more flexibility from batteries or from other forms of storage or from demand response, then we would easily do away with a lot of the price spikes and keep prices down. We do away with negative prices and keep revenues more stable for industry. And yet we don't yet have functioning flexibility markets within the electricity sector. So that's another area that we're tackling. And we tackle these different elements with a mixture of legislation, with guidance for those who are involved, with some funding. There are a range of different tools we can use. So all of that's to say that we're trying to make the system more efficient so that industry who traditionally have their fossil fuel process, which they've been used to, it's what their mindset is used to, they need to be enticed through more efficient and cheaper energy and through simpler regulatory frameworks to be able to take advantage of electrification and decarbonisation. And that's the route we want to follow, because that's the only way we're going to get an industrial decarbonisation such that we can achieve our decarbonisation goals overall. I'll leave it there for now and happy to take questions in the course of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. This was a good overview. I think there's a ton of stuff in here which you can pick up on. Lowering system costs and putting that in relationship with our need to increase infrastructure investments. And I think the question of how negative prices fit into all of that discussion is worth picking up on later. Now I would like to turn briefly to Paul Münich. Paul, I understand you've recently conducted a kind of case study of industrial transformation. Tom has just described what is happening at EU level in terms of policy developments. How do these policy developments feature in your thinking around industrial transformations? Could you maybe give us, I don't know, either a case study or provide us with examples here?
Yes, thank you very much, Nikolai. I will try to. However, I think it's good to decompose this very complex debate again, because when it comes to industrial policy, we have many different issues that are tried to tackle with just a bunch of a very small amount of policy instruments. And I think right now the industry here in Europe is at a very critical point in three dimensions, basically. First of all, competitiveness, increasing pressure on global markets for basic materials as well as for tech products. The second dimension is definitely the climate dimension, where we have to reach a more decisive action also on the short term, also in industry. And the third dimension that I would like to add is the question of resilience. We have this very challenging international context where industry is more and more becoming a geopolitical lever, and that's why it's good that this is also at the very center of the debate. And when we look at industry, we have two major symptoms which describe the difficult situation. And one of that is the stagnating investments of industry that reflects also the difficult future. It's difficult to foresee where we're actually heading with our energy prices, with regards to the ETS, with regards to climate policy in general. And the second symptom is the high cost of energy in global comparison. And for the EU to bring back its industry on track for a long-term resilient, sustainable, and also prosperous future, we need quite an active industrial policy. And it's very good that over the past few years we've had this shift, that this is something we more and more actively talk about, like this industrial policy. And this industrial policy needs to be able to tackle different policy areas successfully. That it needs to increase resilience by replacing fossil fuel imports by renewable electricity from Europe. And it also needs to support innovation and also manage, to a certain extent, the structural change that is normal in any kind of industry, of course. And it also needs to have a strategic perspective in strengthening long-term competitiveness business models that create new added value, as well as it needs to consider existing structures and jobs and manage a socially just transition. And another constraint that the European Union, of course, has is the constraint of budget. I mean, we have very limited budgets, and we have very different cost and standard of living in member states across Europe, and different capabilities to put in place, for example, subsidies for industry. A key no regret in all this complex situation, of course, is that the European response to high cost of fossil energy imports must be renewable. Like, we have to further deploy renewable electricity. And the main course of action should focus on electrification of industrial energy demand, on resilient, but also, of course, open value chains, and on leveraging the European single market as a demand for climate neutral and domestically produced products. And if we now look closer into energy, I can just second what Tom already said. It's important to create an efficient energy system. And in addition to deploying renewables, we also have to make sure that the renewable electricity that is produced is efficiently being integrated by, for example, further building out European energy infrastructure, more rapid deployment of grids, but also from the industry side to more and more adopt to this higher fluctuation in the energy power prices, and also in exploring the opportunities of consuming electricity more flexibly, and seeing the financial benefit in that. Of course, efficient energy systems are something we should work towards, but at the same time, this is something that will show effect rather on the more long-term perspective. So it's reasonable to also complement this long-term efficient energy system with short-term action that addresses industrial power prices. And there are two major reasons, or two political objectives, why that can be a good idea. The first one is to support industries that are strategically important for us, that are already electricity intensive, energy intensive, and that are heavily exposed to international competition, and at the same time currently not competitive. And there's certainly a case for that. And the other perspective, or the other objective, the political objective why supporting industry with its power prices could be, or is, that we have to support the electrification of industrial processes, to support a technology ramp up on the one hand side, to have a technology learning to reduce costs, and also to use investment cycles. Whenever a fossil asset is reaching the end of its lifetime, we have to make sure that these points in time can be used to contribute to reaching our climate targets for industry. And due to limited budgets, power price subsidies need to be targeted to those industries that cannot avoid high energy costs by implementing, for instance, flexibility measures, or also by boosting their energy efficiency. So whatever kind of instruments we establish, it has to be in a way that it still keeps up a high incentive for industry to flexibilize its electricity consumption, and also to enhance energy efficiency. And at the same time, the power price subsidies that are in the discussion, they have to be in harmony, of course, with the European partners, and that have to take into account different financial capabilities of the different member states. And these are a lot of different boundary conditions that must be met in order to support industry with electricity cost. And that's why we currently investigate in a process what the different requirements by industry are, and how, like, with what kind of tools these can be tackled. Maybe just to mention it, I think it's also important to look at the side of green markets. Of course, it's good that we have certain policies that address the ramp-up of green industrial production, including quota, including ideas of green public procurement. And that is very important to start and scale new technologies and thereby reduce cost. But in addition to that, we also have to provide a long-term perspective. And that means that we also have to increase the cost of a fossil production. That means that the ETS has to be, as a central policy instrument, has to be strengthened. And we also have to find a way that the CBAM manages to internalize the cost of carbon into the production. So I think it's very important using this upcoming cycle to also talk about like how more and more products can be included in the scope of the CBAM. I'll keep it with that, and really happy to discuss.
Thank you so much. And you end on a very discussion-worthy note, the scope of the CBAM, a discussion which I'll try my best to steer clear of for the next hour or so. But I'm going to steal your analytical framework of competitiveness, climate, and resilience as a kind of triangle of challenges to the EU industrial landscape. Now, Paul, I think you outlined very well the kind of both short-term needs and longer-term perspectives on the power side when it comes to scaling renewables. Tiffany, I'd like to turn to you next. Yara is, if I'm not mistaken, the single largest gas consumer in Europe. A lot of the discussion, and if I may say so, also the political rhetoric, is very heavily focused on the electricity side. For good reason, electrification is a very attractive decarbonization pathway. But at the same time, there's still a lot of gas being used by European industry, and certainly the direct or indirect electrification of industrial processes seems to be more of a medium-term issue, at least I'd say in energy-intensive processes such as the fertilizer industry. So maybe my question to you would be, having heard these first two interventions, what's your perspective on what is cooking in Brussels at the moment? And what are some of the challenges that Yara is wrestling with? Do you find yourself in this analytical triangle that Paul presented, or does your perspective differ?
Thank you for the introduction, Nikolai. You know, if we talk about clean energy, I think I would start with the key message from our side as Yara is that we need to be pragmatic. In Europe, as you underlined, we are a large gas consumer. We consume 1% of all the natural gas in Europe. Whether we're the number one consumer, I leave it to others to double check. But we are indeed a significant gas consumer. So we have also no other choice as Yara than to decarbonize. As a company, we have a commitment to reach net zero by 2050 and concrete climate targets up to 2030. And for now, we are on track towards this goal and this ambition. So the goal is decarbonization from our perspective, not necessarily, I would say, ideological purity, if I may put it like that. So by that, I mean that we should look at all clean energy sources that are available in order for our industry to decarbonize at the right speed and at the right scale. Ultimately, we believe also that as a bridge in this decarbonization journey, there's also a role to play for natural gas if used together, for instance, with carbon capture and storage. If I summarize a bit quickly, I would kind of say if one energy source helps to reduce emission, then it has to be part of the solution. When we look now at the challenges we face as Yara in that triangle, I would underline three challenges. The first one, it has been already discussed by previous panelists here, is the challenge related to the supply of renewable energy or to low carbon energy. The availability remains a challenge, especially for a major energy consumer like us. So we really hope that member states will continue to implement the different, I would say, energy transition pathways they have started to kick off. But it has to be, of course, underlined that we're not the only energy consumer in the industry. And I think Hélène will also certainly flag that. We're competing with other industries and countries for the very same clean energy sources. This creates volatility and uncertainty. So my point here is that we really need to scale what works now. The second challenge is the infrastructure access. Assuming that we have sufficient clean energy available in Europe, then we need to get access to it. Whether it's grid congestion, permitting delays, lack of cross-border infrastructures, these are major bottlenecks, and we are very welcoming from that perspective the Affordable Energy Action Plan that Tom mentioned, as well as the overall political will in the Clean Industrial Deal to facilitate the transition towards a net zero industry. There shouldn't be an either or. We have to decarbonize and have to have a competitive industry at the same time. And the willingness now of the Commission to solve some of these major challenges also related to the access to the infrastructure is key. So faster permitting, smarter grid planning, more investment in the transmission are really key elements. And we are looking forward for these different initiatives to really unfold at member states level. The third challenge is the demand and the market signals. Of course, we're ready to decarbonize, and maybe later I can give some examples of what we're doing as Yara in Europe to decarbonize via different pathways or production in Europe. But if we decarbonize and there's no demand, what's the point? So basically, there's of course a growing demand for low carbon products, also for low carbon fertilizers. At the same time, the market signals remain relatively weak. Customers want low carbon. Whether they are willing to pay for it, it depends with whom we enter into a dialogue. It has to be said that we also don't expect, for the case of fertilizers, that farmers have to be the only ones to cover the additional costs related to producing fertilizers with renewable energy instead of natural gas. So we need to find a holistic approach, a value chain approach. And in that perspective, some of the key indications, whether in the Clean Industrial Deal or also in the vision on the future of agriculture towards incentives for low carbon fertilizers, are really essential. This is a bit the chicken and the egg, but ultimately having strong market signals and the demand for low carbon fertilizers will boost it, can really create additional incentives for our sector and our company to continue to invest in decarbonization. So to sum up, I would say technology neutrality, results-driven approach, because ultimately every ton of CO2 we can avoid moving forward is essential.
Thank you very much, Tiffany, for this overview. Competitive energy supplies, infrastructure access, demand for renewable and low carbon products, very clear. Now, your perspective was coming from the fertilizer industry. Hélène, you speak for Dow. Dow is a very large chemical company, lots of different business units, very diverse energy profile, but certainly energy intensive. Would you agree with the analysis of Tiffany? And what's your view on the kind of development of industrial policy in the energy space right now?
Thank you, Nikolai. Yeah, I think we're very close on many of those topics. I'll start by saying a few words about Dow, because we're an American headquartered company, and we are not a very famous name in Europe compared to other companies. So indeed, Dow is one of the world's leading material science companies, and we serve customers in markets, in various markets, and supply all major downstream value chains. That includes packaging, infrastructure, mobility, consumer applications. We operate manufacturing sites in 30 countries and employ approximately 36,000 people globally. We have a very strong European footprint. Currently, we employ around 10,000 people in Europe, and we operate 26 manufacturing sites in 9 European countries. Our main assets in Europe with the crackers are in the Netherlands, in Germany, and in Spain. So indeed, we are an energy-intensive company. Globally, we import and use approximately 10 gigawatts of energy to produce heat, power, and steam. Of course, we conclude renewables, PPAs, in Europe and elsewhere. In 2023, we sourced globally more than half of purchased electricity from renewables. And we contracted a capacity that is actually greater than 1,000 megawatts. And renewable energy will remain an important part of our decarbonization strategy going forward, of course. However, renewable PPAs are not a solution to the lack of competitiveness of industry in Europe. And anyway, for a company like Dow, low emission sources such as hydrogen, advanced nuclear, or natural gas with CCUS are required for the energy transition. And something I would like to say is that the specificity of our industry, the chemicals industry, is that we have double exposure because we use fossil fuels as energy, but also as feedstock. We are committed to climate neutrality, and we're actually building the world's first net zero petrochemical complex. So we are aiming at carbon neutrality, scope 1 and scope 2 emission, and we're building it in Canada. It's worth noting that the technology and the plan to decarbonize at the cracker site, to decarbonize the cracker, was developed in Europe and originally designed for implementation at our European site. So it's a solution where at the moment we burn the waste gases in the cracker, and it emits a lot of CO2, of course. And our solution is actually based on CCS. We will transform those waste gases in what we call circular hydrogen on one hand, and burn that hydrogen with zero emission, and the CO2 will be captured and stored. And yes, we haven't been able to move forward with that plan in Europe. Tom and others mentioned permitting. We all actually have our own permitting issues with industry and decarbonization project as well. We have a permitting issue with NOx for a European site where we're planning the deployment that is still not solved to this day. So that's also a problem we're facing. And of course, we have a problem of that we're not facing in Canada, because in Canada, they have competitive energy available, competitively priced feedstock. And of course, the infrastructure for CCS is there. It's literally next to our site in Alberta. Investment decision in big companies are a zero game. And we have to make choices. And the decision was made to prioritize another site for decarbonization first. Of course, we are facing a very challenging market. And unfortunately, like many other chemicals or other industry companies, we have made an announcement about assessing our European footprint. This is a reflection of the pressure the European chemical industry is under as a result of the sharp deterioration of Europe's competitiveness position over the last 3 years. So Europe is structurally uncompetitive and is the region with the highest energy cost in the world. Gas prices in Europe are 3 to 4 times higher than the US, for instance. So the priority in the short and the long term is to do everything to reduce energy and carbon costs. In the short term, because we are trying to stop the bleeding. So of course, we still have decarbonization in mind, but we really are trying to survive in Europe, I think in general, as an industry. And for us, decarbonization cannot mean deindustrialization. That's not how we want it to happen. Many cost add-ons are in the realm of national governments, but the EU can do things beyond rightfully recommending national energy tax reduction. For instance, reestablishing direct cost compensation under the ETS for organic chemicals, or try to protect industry from the counterproductive effects of the methane regulation on gas volumes that will be available in Europe. And I was a bit concerned because the Affordable Energy Action Plan focuses very much on the cost of electricity and not gas. It's really about transparency in the market or some fraud issue potentially. Domestic gas production will also be very helpful. Been recent announcement in the Black Sea, for instance, in Romania, that would also help for the gas volumes available for European industry. And of course, more public funding, support for industrial decarbonization and circularity, by the way, should be available from existing funds and be made more easily and quickly accessible. Currently, the available funds are scattered, burdensome, and quite lengthy to call off. And I'll take the example also for state aid of the recent draft CISAF, so Clean Industrial Deal State Aid Framework, I think. We expect now the final version to be published in the next few weeks. And that kind of framework is unlikely to drive significant industrial decarbonization. Why? And I will come back to the tech neutrality that Tiffany mentioned, is that they impose unrealistic conditionalities and the cap support levels are usually way below what is needed. And we think that the focus should be on emission reduction and or circularity rather than prescribe individual technologies to guide stated decision. So the draft framework, for instance, introduces complexity with criteria that prioritize individual technology pathways. One we're very concerned about is the lack of technology neutrality regarding hydrogen. There should not be any discrimination between RFNBOs or low carbon hydrogen, and not a mandate to mix the two that continues to these days. And the state aid guidelines in general should the lack of technology. Sorry. And so they should be used to facilitate a sustainable business case for low carbon that includes renewables and circular products, while safeguarding global competitiveness and preventing investment leakage during the transition. And one last point I would like to make, like Tiffany, is to address a gap in the EU we see in the EU regulatory framework. I know that industry is often accused actually of asking for deregulation or a bonfire of regulation. The truth is that on the one hand, we need to urgently address the barriers to decarbonization that actually exist in the Green Deal. That's true. But on the other hand, there are instances where we actually need regulation. And what we miss is demand pull measures for premium products, so low carbon or circular, and our inability as industry to pass through the cost. I've mentioned hydrogen earlier, and one of the problems with hydrogen, for instance, is that unlike the refining or transport fuel sector, the chemical industry cannot pass through the higher cost of green or clean hydrogen. And for Dow, driving products to scale will require, in our view, binding targets for renewable, low carbon, and circular products for all products that you can define at a sectoral level. And that would be key to de-risk investment and stimulate demand pool in all market segments, actually.
Thank you very much, Helene, for the overview. I think there are a couple of common themes emerging there. Of course, the evergreen of industrial concerns, tech neutrality, sure, but also market pull measures as something that is required if we are unable to achieve cost parity on the supply side, I guess. Thank you very much, all of you. I think this was a good outline of the different challenges and some solutions, both on the electron side and the molecular side. If I may, I'd like to pick up on a couple of threads that I see emerging here. And then I also want to give you the opportunity to react to what the other said, if you feel compelled to. To start with, Tom, you mentioned your intervention, the need to lower system costs. And I think that speaks to a lot of industrial anxieties that we feel at the moment, where there's a concern that wholesale prices are not coming down at the pace at which we would like, because fundamentally gas is still setting the price quite often, while at the same time infrastructure costs are going up because we need to scale up the demand for electricity, but also integrate more and more renewables into the system. So that's one side of the debate. And then another side of the debate is a concern with low and negative prices, which kind of cannibalize the investment case for renewables. As a layperson, I think that is confusing, that we're both having a discussion around energy not being affordable enough, while also energy prices being too low, and so we don't have an investment case for renewables. Could you maybe help us square the circle of what the relationship is between the two?
I can certainly give it a go. Sure, yes. So the price of electricity is set minute by minute. It's set depending on how every minute or even every second there's a certain amount of demand and a certain amount of supply. That's how all markets work, at the intersection of supply and demand. And what that price is formed by the form of electricity which is setting that which is meeting that final bit of demanded electricity. So if you have a lot of wind and solar, a lot of renewables on the grid at a time of relatively low demand, then it's the price of renewables which is set, it's the cost of renewables setting the price. But renewables, wind and solar, produce at near zero cost. So if they are setting the price, that means the price can be very, very low, if not zero, or even negative, because when supply exceeds demand. So there are times if there's a low cost form of energy, renewables, setting the price, then you get low prices. That can be good. It should be good for anyone who's able to switch. If as a household or as an industry, if you have a contract which has dynamic pricing, then it means when supply is high and demand is low and prices are low, you should be able to buy at that low price and benefit from it. But not everybody has access to dynamic priced contracts. Sometimes they're just fixed. In fact, during the crisis, we wanted fixed price contracts because the prices were going skyrocketing. So we were a bit afraid of dynamic pricing. But in fact, increasingly, when there are low or negative prices on the market, dynamic pricing would be a good thing to have. So that's the scenario when you've got a lot of renewables on the system setting low prices for electricity. But at the same time, at night, or when there's much less wind or solar available, then the price of electricity is set by the dominant supply, which can often be gas. And as Helena mentioned, gas is not quite as cheap as it was in decades gone by. And so when gas is setting the price of electricity, the gas prices are very high. And that's what happened during the crisis. We had both a huge shock to the system of gas being taken, not being able to use Russian gas, which was a large part of our gas use. And if without that supply, gas prices themselves were very high, so that fed through into the electricity price. So those are two scenarios when you have very different electricity prices in the market. When renewables dominate, you get low prices. And when gas is setting the price, we have high prices. Now, what the Commission's been trying to do is to make sure the market design is such that more and more often the price is set by low-cost renewables and not by the high-priced gas. That's the intention. You can do that by having more and more renewables coming onto the system. You can try to lower gas prices as well, and we've been doing that by diversifying gas sources, by aggregating demand to try to improve our purchasing power for global gas world. So we're trying to make the gas market work better as well. But fundamentally, we're trying to get away from fossil fuels. So by bringing more renewables on and by introducing flexibility, whether it's through using batteries, like big industry, for instance, if they invested in batteries, they could be charging their batteries when there's lots of renewables on the system and prices are low, and then using that power themselves when prices are high. So that's a way of trying to reduce electricity price volatility, either by an industry who owns a battery, but fundamentally that's what we're trying to do with the whole system. The more flexibility we have, the less volatile prices should be. So that's my long explanation of what we're trying to do.
No, thank you very much. I think the explanation is very helpful to, I guess, explain the difficult relationship between, yes, average prices or average total costs are too high, and at the same time, we can have issues with ultra low or negative prices. And what I understand then is that part of the solution that you put forward is more capacity for flexibility, I guess, either through the process itself or through storage, to help square the circle there. I'd like to piggyback on that question, and maybe throw it back to either Paul or Helene. Certainly the issue of industrial flexibility on the electricity side enjoys a lot of political attention at the moment. At the same time, we also have to be honest in terms of the development of flexibility markets across Europe, in terms of actual flex capacity of energy intensives. It seems that we're making rather slow progress. So I guess my question to you respectively would be, how do you see that develop? Either Paul, in your, I guess, study on the chemical industry, how do you regard its flex potential? Or Helene, in your operations, what is your view on it?
I can start, and if that's fine for you, Helene. Yeah, so I mean, maybe adding to what Tom already said. I mean, low or like these low or negative electricity prices are a result not only of exceed of supply over demand, but it's also a symptom of insufficient deployment of the grid, right? Like if we manage to have a more developed grid infrastructure in Europe, we would always find probably a good demand for the electricity that we have. Tom already mentioned the batteries, which industry could employ, but what is probably even more interesting is the storage or the flexible use of electrically produced heat. So one example that I've seen or that we've seen in Germany is that, for example, the transmission grid operator 50 Hertz, together with a chemical park operator in Leuna in Eastern Germany, they have decided to build an electric boiler that would use all the electricity that would need to be curtailed otherwise to produce steam in the chemical park at a high pressure and temperature level that is needed in the industrial production. And that always like reduces the load of the conventional natural gas plant. So it's kind of a hybrid system. And I think that shows pretty well that the flexibility is possible in industry, but the regulatory framework is not yet there. Because what we would like to see in the reality eventually is that every company could like crush the numbers and find business cases where they can like operate hybrid system, for instance, to produce their heat that they need for the industrial production. And whenever there's not enough electricity available from renewable sources, you can still switch back to natural gas or whatever other energy source you have. That is one element. On the longer term, of course, you want to get rid of all fossil energies. So there, I think thermal energy storages are very promising. There are a bunch of startups and Anlagenbau, like construction companies that are developing these technologies where basically you don't need critical raw materials or whatever to store your energy, but rather the electricity is consumed consumed in times of low prices and stored in terms of heat, for example, in bricks or in concrete, and then is used to produce a 24/7 output of heat or steam for the industrial production. So I think we have still quite a way to go to reorganize our power system so that this flexible electricity operation is incentivized. And I've just outlined 2 examples of probably quite a lot that industry will come up with. I'm very confident in engineering here, and I think as soon as there's a financial incentive to play with the market signals of renewable electricity, then industry will come up with even more solutions that we can not even imagine yet. At the same time, still, of course, anticipating that Dow has a bunch of steam crackers, there are, of course, facilities that do not allow for a flexible operation, like of maybe within like reducing the load factor maybe by 10 or 20%. But of course, at the same time as incentivizing flexibility, we also have to account for the industries that will not be able to flexibilize. So it's going to be a tricky task to combine the two.
Thank you, Paul, actually, to acknowledge that we do not have that demand side flexibility as industry. That, I mean, some activities may have it, but that's definitely not the case for us, much less for the crackers. You know, we have technical and economic barriers to running our sites at lower than normal operating rates. Industrial electrification, for instance, e-cracking, will be very high capex. So you don't make that kind of decision to do flexibility. You make that kind of investment decision to operate your site as much as you can. So of course, you can have flexibility solutions that are battery storage or even CHP. We have CHP sites, so they can also take part of that. So that should be on a voluntary basis. I think we're always very concerned, of course, that our lack of flexibility will be penalized eventually. So it's fine that you can do it and you can be rewarded for that, but if our process does not allow for it, we should not be penalized for it. I mean, battery storage is, of course, potentially a solution in the future, even for us, but again, very high capex. So it's not so easy to come up with a project like that. Of course, we need more grids, but probably in order to lower the cost, there should be some incentive for intermittent power producer to store energy where they produce it, rather than have to invest in grid to send that electricity much further. So that's a responsibility that they could bear as well. And I wanted to come back on the very low prices or negative prices. RES PPAs are oftentimes mentioned, but if anything, they tend to expose buyers to market volatility. They offer long-term hedging, that's for sure, but they don't necessarily fully protect you against expensive peak hour prices. And full baseload PPAs are in practice still quite rare. But they can still prevent you from benefiting from the negative prices when they occur. So they are not such a silver bullet, actually. And what we see rather is that the risk of the project development is shifted onto the consumer from the power producer. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, both of you. Indeed, it's a complex topic. The issue of how industry can best benefit from negative prices, if at all. Certainly storage seems to be part of the answer there, but also it will probably necessitate optimizing between different forms of electricity sourcing, where yes, you may contract PPAs, but indeed sometimes they can limit your exposure to the short-term market in a way that you may not be entirely comfortable with. At the same time, you will want to hedge for at least a share of your procurement. Otherwise, your exposure to the short-term market and resultant risks are very high. So what I'm taking from this then, both on the kind of contracting discussion and the flex discussion, is a perspective on storage, whether on-site or co-located with a RES asset, as potentially interesting. But the CapEx question kind of being at the moment still a barrier there. And I suppose even the OpEx question is a bit of a question mark, because it relies on you to make assumptions about how negative or ultra low prices will develop in the future. And I suppose for very large industrial companies, that is possible if they have very sophisticated energy teams. For a lot of smaller companies, that's perhaps a bit more difficult. Tom, I'll pull you in. I see you have your hand up, and I'd like to focus a bit more on the molecule side. But first, over to you.
Thanks. Yes, just to finish up on the flexibility discussion, it was very good points made. From the Commission's perspective, I wanted to be clear that we certainly don't ever envisage there being any kind of mandatory requirement for flexibility. That's simply not feasible with exactly the types of industries that we've been talking of this afternoon, where they're base load. So certainly there should never be anything mandatory about it. What we do want to do is get the price signals right. In that sense, flexibility should be like energy efficiency. if there is an advantage to a company being more energy efficient, they undertake the investment until it's no longer, the cost is no longer worthwhile. And flexibility is the same. If there's an advantage to be had from being more flexible, then it should be, the incentive should be there to undertake it, but not otherwise. The other point to make is that fundamentally, whatever the flexibility, whoever's providing the flexibility in the market, everybody benefits. The more flexibility there is in the grid management, in the way the system's operating, the more flexibility there is in terms of batteries and suppliers and demand response, that does have an impact on reducing price volatility, price spikes, reducing negative prices. So every consumer benefits from that. So for me, even if you're not seeing yourself as a flexible participant in the market, you should welcome every incentive to boost flexibility because that lowers system costs for everybody. So that's an important point to bear in mind. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Tom. And I think you calm a lot of industrial nerves with that clarification that this is a carrot approach. This is not a stick approach on the flexibility question. Now, I mentioned one of the barriers for the deployment of storage assets, there being large CapEx requirements. I think the same is true for some of the solutions, Tiffany, that you outlined. For example, carbon capture and storage, where in addition to a high CapEx, you also face additional OpEx resulting from that. Now, we can do a lot in trying to reduce the costs on the supply side, but we may not be entirely successful with that in achieving perfect cost parity with traditional fossil fuel production. Certainly not unless we want to live with very aggressive carbon prices. And then there's a social cost to that, which needs to be borne in mind. So I mentioned in the beginning that we may then end up with products that, yes, we produce in Europe and they have a lower emissions footprint, but they end up being more expensive. You mentioned the necessity for market pull measures there. I'd be interested to hear whether you have any ideas of what that could look like in the EU, what sort of measures we can put in place. Because often what I hear is, yes, it's important, but my God, it's complex. There's so many products out there. How on earth do we do that in a way that actually benefits European industry? So I'd be very interested in your perspective. And of course, Hélène, if you have something to share, or Paul, I'm happy to hear your perspectives.
That is indeed a key question, Nikolai. And from where we sit, as Yara being at the intersection between industry and agriculture, we feel that it's important to take a value chain or a sectoral approach. If we would try to have a one-size-fits-all approach, it would not work in terms of creating incentive for low-carbon products. So what we believe is important is to first enable the sectors like the fertilizer sector to have, I would say, a favorable framework in order to undertake a large-scale, whether renewable or low-carbon ammonia project, in order that we reach final investment decisions, because today not that many projects are reaching that level of maturity. Ultimately, the challenge today is that fertilizers are seen as a commodity rather than as a premium product. And so it is a challenge to really pass on the full cost of the green transition to other producers in the value chain. So what we call for is an approach where we would really have the possibility to spread across evenly the cost through the value chain all the way down to the consumers, because this is then a possibility to create a whole sustainable business model. If we look at the fertilizers, especially low carbon footprint fertilizers, as I said before, we don't believe and don't expect that farmers should be the ones bearing the additional cost, but there can be ways at the retail stage to adapt the spread of the cost. Ultimately, it's only a few euro cents if we look into the impact of low carbon fertilizers when used in producing, for instance, wheat to produce bread. We have several partnerships in Europe because as an alternative to really seeing a real incentive schemes being really presented at the European level. We have been taking a step ahead. So we have partnerships, for instance, with the Lantmännen, which is an agricultural cooperative in Sweden, where we provide low carbon fertilizers, and those low carbon fertilizers are then used by Swedish farmers to produce bread. And ultimately, the products are sold as part of Lantmännen shops as fossil-free bread. And if you look into the price impact, the fossil-free bread, as Lantmännen is marketing it, is placed between the cost of conventional bread and organic bread. So in terms of the impact for end consumers, also all of us as consumers for the daily bread is limited. Partnerships are one solution. We also have a larger partnership with PepsiCo in Europe. But what we really need is ultimately to see concrete steps in terms of the Green Lead Market Initiative that the Commission has been announcing. Also to see what the Industrial Decarbonization Accelerator Act will entail. We've been quite vocal to underline the need to really have a sectoral approach, and also to create possibly gradual obligations where appropriate for crop processors to use low carbon fertilizers. This could be an alternative way to really create a kind of a pull effect. Alternatively, of course, there's a possibility to look into incentivizing farmers to adopt more low carbon fertilizers, ultimately more sustainable practices in the context of the Common Agricultural Policy. But that would be the topic of a whole other debate outside here. But whether we look at crop processors obligation or Common Agricultural Policy, we need some enablers to get there. And the enablers are, for instance, an harmonized certification for lower carbon products. That is definitely a necessity in order to create transparency and trust in the market. And the second prerequisite could be to create a subcategory for lower carbon footprint fertilizers in the dedicated regulation, being the fertilizing product regulation. So I would say that whether it's in the Clean Industrial Deal or the Vision of the Future of Agriculture for Agriculture and Food, there has been a lot of promising words by the European Commission in the context of creating this demand for low carbon fertilizers. And this is really something where we look forward to what the Commission will present. The moment is now, I would say, in order to help us as fertilizer industry to confirm our business case and also to confirm potential future decarbonization investments. We will have to see really pull mechanisms being presented at the European level to be able to feel that there's a full business case for our future decarbonization projects in Europe.
Thank you very much for this explanation. I've taken a lot of notes here: partnerships, gradual introduction of obligations, kind of downstream at the distributor or the processing level, or you incentivize, quote unquote, the farmers directly, or you set product standards. Of course, a lot of those options entail sensitive political discussions. We all remember very vividly the farmer protests that kind of rocked Europe, I think 1 or 2 years ago. Certainly we felt a lot of it here in Brussels. But what I'm hearing then is that there are options out there. Now, what I noticed you did not mention is public procurement as an option. Now, I assume that's because specifically in the fertilizer industry, the leverage of public procurement is relatively limited. Is that correct?
Exactly. I mean, this is possibly an option for end food products, like to create public procurement policies for a more sustainable, I don't know, fruits and vegetables that are offered in school canteens, etc. But the ripple effects of all the steps that have to be done through the value chain to come up at the very beginning of the food value chain, being the use of fertilizers, is very far away. So we don't believe that it would have the sufficient pull effect for low carbon fertilizers. Yeah. So might work for other sectors, but not so much for this one. Hence the need to really have a sectoral value chain approach.
No, thank you, very clear. And I think highlights indeed the sectoral specificity of some of those problems, and we come back to the issue of complexity here, where even obligations that you may want to introduce downstream in an industry, what quote unquote constitutes downstream will vary drastically between different value chains, right? Helene, I'd like to pull you in here. What's your perspective on the idea of lead markets? Oh, you're still muted.
Yeah, I lowered my hand, but I didn't unmute. Sorry. Yeah, I mentioned in my introduction that as DAO, we think we will need binding product requirements. The Commission has already started working on that in the circularity space with the packaging and packaging waste regulation, for instance. And they are starting, but of course it will take some time, and it will be by product category with ESPR. So what used to be eco-design, but so, there's lots of activity going on, but of course, ultimately it's a lot of products to regulate and to ensure that the content is really what it pretends to be. I also agree that for us, public procurement doesn't really work. Yeah, I mean, there's also ENZIA for clean manufacturing, clean tech manufacturing. Unfortunately, the upstream part of the value chains are not included, so organic chemicals is not in, but some components that we are making can be in. So we will see there are some positive effects connected to that, but it's not, it works for the last manufacturing step, but not so much for us. So we'll have to see if we benefit. Yeah, that's it.
You're muted.
Thank you. Indeed. I mentioned that I'm starting to pull questions that we receive from the Slido, and one of them was on public procurement, how to make them work, or how to make this form of policy work. What I hear though then is that, yeah, maybe in some sectors, I guess steel comes to mind, cement comes to mind, but perhaps less so in the space of the fertilizer industry or the chemicals industry outside of chemicals that go into building materials, I guess. Paul, you mentioned initially in your initial intervention, public procurement as an option. Have you looked into how to give this mechanism teeth, or come up with any additional ideas that we haven't heard before?
Yeah, happy to come in here. I think you're right that probably public procurement is more interesting for other sectors like steel, like cement production. I could see some room for public procurement when it comes to building materials, which also rely on plastics to some extent. Like, for example, when you look at plastic pipes for buildings, that could even be something where requirements or public procurement for green or circular plastics could play a role. But I think when it comes to this wide variety of chemicals, we really need to find different mechanisms to make a case for climate-friendly production. And I think I've introduced this third dimension, which is resilience, which is like industrial production as a geopolitical lever. And I think fertilizers and ammonia are actually a pretty good example for that. Looking at current trades of fertilizers and ammonia, we see that, for example, Russia is a pretty large exporter of fertilizers globally, and it's a question whether that should be something that we want to see in the future. And I think that would be something where we would have to wrap our heads around whether we can build standards that also are going beyond Germany, Europe, or and also include other regions in the world to commit to a more climate-friendly production that is not based on fossil fuels.
Thank you very much. Clear. Tom, you have your hand up. I'll let you come in, and you can decide whether or not you want to comment on the EU's relationship to the import of Russian fertilizer, or demand-side measures more broadly.
I'll start elsewhere. I wanted to pick up the points that have been raised already, and to flag that the Commission's been working on this already with the Net Zero Industry Act, where again we've been looking at the non-price criteria to include in public procurement regimes in general, to bring in resilience as a factor and taking into account disruptions to our supply chain, which we undervalued in the past. So, and we're going to follow up on that with the Industrial Decarbonisation Accelerator Act, which will come out at the end of the year, which again is looking at public procurement regimes, is looking at labelling regimes. You know, we've grown used to product labels for on our white goods and as a very clear information source about what's good and what's bad product. We're developing the idea of carbon labels for all sorts of products. Steel, for instance, what would that mean if we were labeling and identifying the carbon content of steel? And that's all part of our initiative under the Clean Industrial Deal to create lead markets, to boost information and awareness and markets for cleaner products. On the push side, again, there are already instruments there, whether it's the carbon contracts for difference that some member states are trying out, such as Germany. The EIB is coming forward with novel approaches to financing to bridge this cost gap between what market price of a product is and what the price of a clean product is. The Commission itself is experimenting with through the development of the Industrial Decarbonisation Bank. We're launching a pilot project of 1 billion, so it's a large pilot project of how to decarbonise heating, process heating. And there again, we'll be looking at carbon contracts for difference, whatever, all the different types and structures that might exist. And it's true, we also want to explore what's relevant for different products, different industries, because it's true, there are very different dynamics in different industries, and one instrument will not necessarily be universally appropriate. So we've got to play around a bit and see what works. But that's exactly what we're doing at the moment, and member states are doing as well. So we're building up information and a sense of what instruments are the best for promoting this type of development and decarbonisation.
Thank you for that addition. Indeed, there are a number of support instruments which focus on the OPEX side and conceivably can also tackle higher product cost, I guess. And you mentioned some of them. Paul, you mentioned in the beginning the German industrial electricity price idea, which I suppose goes in a comparable direction. Of course, always having in mind that all of that is still subject to approval from DG Comp and an ongoing discussion. But interesting. Now, looking over the questions that we received from our dear audience, we've been covering a lot of good ground. There's one question which I'd still like to pose, and that touches on CCS as a technology. And essentially, the question asks, how do we ensure that the reservoirs are totally CO2 proof? So essentially, I think behind that question stands a certain suspicion of the reliability of decarbonization claims. In that case, specifically to CCS. So I guess I pose that question over to the group. Tiffany, if I'm not mistaken, you have a CCS project. Could you maybe speak to how you ensure emissions reductions? And then Paul, I see your hand.
Sure, thank you for that. Indeed, we are currently rolling out a leading, if not, I think the first project in that scale for carbon capture and storage in our plant in the Netherlands, in Sluiskil. There we will basically capture the carbon from next year onwards, and it's about 800,000 tons of CO2 per year. For the next 15 years, that will be captured and stored into the seabed of the Norwegian Sea. Basically, the way we ensure this claim is first by the fact that we are already capturing a lot of the CO2. We actually sell the CO2 to the food industry to produce sparkling water, to produce beer, but the amount of CO2 we produce is much bigger than the needs of the food industry. So with this possibility to store the carbon, we are able to reduce our climate impact significantly. Connecting with the discussion we had earlier, it's about 60 to 70% of the footprint climate-wise of the fertilizer that is reduced compared to the conventional production with natural gas. Now, how we make sure the claims are proof and solid and also ensure the permanence that is expected in terms of ensuring we meet the goal of net zero, it's because all our projects are third-party verified, whether it's DNV or another third-party producer. And also we are now working with our partners in the context of specific projects we have, like in Germany, to make sure also that the reductions we claim can be verified by some ISO norms. So we are working as much as possible to align with existing certification schemes. It's true that we need more of that. That was brought up by some fellow panelists here, whether it's in the context of low carbon ammonia, where the European Ammonia Association has been creating a certification scheme. And this is something we will eventually have to also do for low carbon fertilizers.
Thank you very much. Okay, clear. Tom, I know that you have to jump off at 1600 sharp. So if you wanted to come in either on that question or leave us with some remarks, please, over to you.
Thanks. Yes, just briefly on the CCS front, just to flag that we have already a framework there, and regulatory framework and financial support for developing CCS, which will be reviewed again early next year together with the revision of the ETS regime, which will make a big difference to the economics of CCS. So there are initiatives there to promote this, because as you say, we fundamentally need CCS if we're going to carry on using fossil fuels. So those are two initiatives to flag. And in general, on the whole narrative, I mean, as you said right at the beginning, the Commission's produced a lot of action plans and a lot of strategies about how we're taking all of this forward. I think we're still very keen to engage. I mean, Sustainable Energy Week is a major exercise in engagement with stakeholders to learn of what's working, what are we addressing well, and what are we not addressing, or what are member states not implementing. So just to say that the Commission's very happy to hear from stakeholders and industry. We'll carry on the discussion to learn what works best for you to remove barriers and to lower costs so that we end up with an affordable decarbonisation. Thanks very much. Sorry I have to jump off, but I have to. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Couldn't have said it better myself, and I have very little to add to these closing remarks, because we are at 1600 and we've covered a lot of ground. Electrification, how to lower system costs, how to create a market for renewable low carbon products, what to do about the decarbonization of molecules. I hope you found this useful. Thank you very much to all of our panelists. And from my side, I wish you lots of fun with the rest of the EU Sustainable Energy Week and hope to see you around soon. Thanks you all and have a good afternoon. Ciao.
Thank
Thank you very
you.
much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.